It says 25 years ago he had a drinking problem. He voluntarily entered a 28-day treatment program. Early on in the treatment program, they had to sit in a circle with the leader and tell the other people in the group about the extent of their drinking. So they went around the circle and they all told their story except for one busy guy named Max. When it came time for him to talk about his drinking, he said, "I never really drank that much." They said, "Max, you're in an alcoholic treatment center for a month. You weren't sipping Cokes. Tell us the truth." He admitted. He said, "I'm being honest with you. I never really had all that much to drink." Well, upon coming into the program, they had all signed affidavits to be able to get information any way they wanted. So they had a speakerphone in the center of the circle, and the leader of the group said, "I'm going to call the bar that's close to your office, and we'll just find out." So they called and asked for the bartender, and the leader said to him, "Do you know Max so-and-so?" The bartender says, "Yes, oh, like a brother. He stops in every day after work and has a minimum of 6 martinis. Man, this guy drinks like a fish. He's the best customer we have." The rest of the people in the group all looked at Max. Max said, "Yes, I had a lot to drink." A little while later on in the group, they asked everyone, "Have you ever hurt anybody, a family member or a friend, while you were drunk?" Some people described their experiences. They got around the circle to Max, who said, "I would never ever hurt anybody, not when I'm sober, not when I'm drunk. I have 4 lovely children. I've never hurt my wife. I've never hurt my kids." The leader says, "You know, Max, we don't believe you. We're going to call your wife." As soon as Max's wife started talking on the speakerphone, Max started breathing heavily. He knew something was coming that he had been unwilling to face. The leader said, "Mrs. So-and-so, has Max ever mistreated you or anyone in the family when he was drunk?" And she said, "Well, yes, he has. It happened just this last Christmas Eve. He took our 9-year-old daughter shopping on Christmas Eve, bought her a new pair of shoes. He's a generous man. On the way home, our little girl was sitting in the front seat enjoying her new shoes. And Max passed the bar and saw the cars of some buddies. He pulled in. It was a cold, wintry day, 12 degrees with a high wind chill. He made sure all the windows were rolled up snugly. He left the car running so that the heater was blowing, and he said to our 9-year-old daughter, 'I'll be right back. You just play with your shoes. I'll be right back.' He went in the bar and started drinking with his buddies. He didn't come out of the bar until midnight. In that time, the vehicle had shut off and the windows had become frozen over and locked up so tight she couldn't get herself out of the car. When the authorities opened up the car and rushed her to the hospital, she was so badly frostbitten that her thumb and her forefinger had to be amputated. And her ears were so damaged by the cold that she will be deaf for the rest of her life." This is as the wife describes this to the group. Max falls off his chair and starts convulsing on the ground. He just couldn't bear admitting what he had done. He couldn't face it. He was going to live the rest of his life in some fantasy world of denial about what he had done. Max, to that point at least, was unable to forgive himself. 2 stories. One of forgiveness and one of a man who couldn't forgive himself. People, and I don't know who I was saying to this recently, in the Assemblies of God, we preach against drinking and alcohol. And we generally don't drink at all. When I got my credentials, part of my getting credentials was that I told them I would not drink, and I don't drink. I don't drink. I just don't. And people just think that we're just against alcohol or against having wine. It's just what we're taking a stand against, and this is just not my notes or anything, it's just a sidebar, is the destructive forces of alcohol. It's not a person can't have a glass of wine. Paul tells Timothy to have a little wine for his stomach. It's not the drink itself. It's what is behind it and the destructive force behind it that we are opposed to. There is a lot of people in this world whose lives and children whose lives have been destroyed. Families that have been destroyed by the alcohol. Why did I tell this story? To depress all the time? Everybody? No. If I had time, I could pass the microphone down the aisle and I would be willing to bet that every person here would have something they could share, some way they have hurt other people. I'm pretty sure it would not be as severe, I'm sure it wouldn't be, as Max's story, but we hurt people. Maybe you did it on purpose, maybe you just didn't realize what you were doing. Maybe you had such huge needs yourself and you were so hurting yourself that you didn't realize or care that you were hurting someone else. Now, on the other hand, maybe you've been hurt deeply by someone, rejected, made fun of, and criticized. The fact of life is this: people hurt each other. You can pretty much plan on the fact that as long as you're in the world, you're going to hurt people and they're going to hurt you. When you hurt, how you handle that hurt will to a large degree determine your happiness in life. It will determine how you handle life itself. There are people who have been hurt by others, and it is like they have taken every one of those hurts, placed it in a sack on their back, and now they walk around every day hunched over, loaded down. They are unhappy, they are angry, they are vengeful, they are unkind. On the surface, they may seem like some of the nicest people in the world, but they have buried, like Max, their pain. And on the surface, you may never know it, but inside, they're crumbling, they're cracking, they are breaking down. If you don't respond to hurts correctly, if you hold on to hurt, it turns into resentment and unforgiveness. Resentment is the destroyer of relationships. It destroys all kinds of relationships. I've heard people say, I don't love my husband anymore. I don't love my wife anymore. I don't have any feelings for my wife. It's like my feelings are dead inside. What's wrong with me? What's wrong is usually resentment. I have told more than one couple in counseling, and usually the love is still there. It's just that it's been so covered over with anger and resentment that they can't feel it anymore. Unforgiveness eats up emotional energy. A couple of weeks ago, my wife got mad at me for something, and she decided she was going to stay mad at me for a couple of days. Now, I know all of you can't possibly believe that someone could be mad at me like that, but she was. Finally, she says, I can't take it anymore. It's taking all my energy away from me. I can't be mad at you like that. I told her there was no need to be anyway. The good news is that you can recover from unforgiveness and get over the hurts of life. The bad news is if you do not, you will never find joy in life. You will never be at peace with God. You will never be healed of your sickness. And if you are saved, you may even lose your salvation. Because Jesus goes on to say that you have to forgive. That verse and those words are so severe that as Christians, we have for the most part really overlooked them. We may not have totally ignored them, but we have definitely ignored them to a degree, giving more weight to the fact that we have been forgiven, that I've been forgiven, great, and I love the Lord, I love Jesus, but he talked about unforgiveness, even more than forgiveness in this passage. Why? Because unforgiveness destroys us. Unforgiveness can destroy our relationship entirely with the Lord. Matthew 6 says this, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. You know what the problem is with that verse? That little word, George, as. That little word as. It is as if Jesus is using a percentage here. As if Jesus is saying to us, if you forgive someone 50%, I'll forgive you 50%. If you forgive some people 75%, I'll forgive you 75%. If you forgive them 80%, I'll forgive you 80%. He says, forgive us our debts as we forgive others. And we're supposed to pray that prayer. Now, how many people want to say, Lord, I've forgiven them 50% of everything they've done. Now I'm asking you to forgive me 50%. You like that idea? Because you're supposed to pray this prayer. This is the motto. What we really pray is, Lord, I've forgiven them 70%, but you can forgive me 100. Isn't that the reality of it? That's the reality of this. And that's not what God expects from us. That's ridiculous. I read the story of Max. Forgiving himself was only part of the equation. The part had to be on his wife. His wife to forgive him. I don't know if she did. The hard part had to be his little girl growing up the rest of her life. When she becomes adult, because I'm sure as a child, his children are very willing to forgive. But as an adult, as she gets to be a teenager and she wants to go out dating and be like all the other girls and be attractive and pretty, and all of a sudden she has no ears and she has fingers that are missing because daddy wanted to drink one night. What about the rest of his family? How were they going to forgive him? Sometimes the hardest part of forgiving is not forgiving ourselves, but the forgiveness in the heart of those who have been left with the scars of our carelessness. God has extended to us blanket forgiveness. All our sins have been forgiven, from the least to the greatest, no matter how small or great. And He expects us from our heart that we will extend to others the same blanket forgiveness. Why is Jesus talking about forgiveness? Why does Jesus use the word debt? It says, forgive us our debts. That's what the actual word is, debt. I didn't borrow anything. I didn't borrow any money from God. Did you? Forgive us our debts. He's not talking about money. Forgiveness. A very simple definition based on what Jesus says. Forgiveness is canceling a debt. Forgiveness is canceling a debt. When someone hurts you, what we end up doing is giving them really an IOU, or they give us an IOU. Remember I told you how people put their hurts in a sack and they carry it around on the backs? In the same way, they are filling up the sack on their back with all the IOUs. IOU. They carry around. If I were to put in a sack of just 1 pound for every sin someone sinned against you, and had you carry that sack around, just 1 pound for every sin, how much would that sack weigh right now? If you had 1 pound in a sack for all the unforgivenesses, every time somebody sinned against you, George, how much would that sack weigh? You think you could even carry it around? And that's what happens. We put all those unforgivenesses, we put them all behind us, so I'm just going to forget about it. Recently we had someone come here and they said something. They were being talked to about unforgiveness and say, we just put it behind us. But you didn't make restitution. You didn't make things right. You can sweep it under the carpet, but the dirt is still there. You can put it on the sack. And the sack on your back, those IOUs, but eventually they get heavy. Eventually they weigh you down and you can no longer operate as you should. The story is called Carrying What I Don't Need. This man writes, he says, I think back to my army days, all those foot marches and all the pain associated with them. As a young private, I packed pretty much everything I could before I went out. I wanted to make sure I had all the comforts to help make my life easier. I made sure to have extra meals, extra snacks whenever I could. Everything I could think of to help me and ease my time on the field. My rucksack was huge. packed full and heavy. After lugging it around for about 5 to 10 miles, I would definitely feel the pain of the weight I was packing. It dug into my shoulders and blistered my feet. It didn't take me long to realize that some of the things in my rucksack weren't really necessary for the mission. I thought they would help, but in reality, they only weighed me down. I learned to pack light and to sleep without a blanket. I learned to eat only what was needed to keep my mind and body active. I realized that many of the items that I packed were only going to weigh me down and hurt me rather than help me. Traveling light is much better than traveling with a heavy load. Likewise, we do the same thing with unforgiveness. And the heaviness of unforgiveness weighs down our lives. There is an alternative, one that comes from God alone, and it's called forgiveness. We know the scriptures, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whosoever would believe in him would not perish but have everlasting life. Matthew 26, this is the blood of my covenant, of the new covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. Luke 24, that Christ will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day, and repentance and forgiveness of sins will be preached in his name to all nations. All the prophets testify about him that everyone who believes in him receives forgiveness of sins through his name. Ephesians 1:7, in him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins. Colossians 1, for he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sin. There's a world of people trying to pay for their own sins, trying to work their way to heaven, so to speak, by being good. But Jesus paid the price, and in Jesus is forgiveness. When we sin, we owe God a debt. That is why the NIV uses the term, forgive us our debts, because we owe him a debt. But instead of collecting the debt, God, because none of us could pay for it, God canceled the debt. He forgave it. It's like I owed him $1 million and he comes up and he just wipes it out. And that's what we must do. That is what our attitude must be for those who sin against us. We must cancel it. Instead of collecting, you cancel. And you say you don't owe me anymore. I forgive you. I'm not going to ask you to pay me. As I was searching for that video yesterday through the different videos on forgiveness, I found the story of a young man. It was on really the Glenn Beck TV, and it was very long. It's about 25 minutes long, the whole story, but it's an extraordinary story. This man was driving down the road in Utah, Salt Lake City, with his wife and his kids. They were going for ice cream. Ironically, a young man coming in the other direction had been drinking. And for some reason, he was coming from the ice cream store where he was going to meet his friends. He blacked out from the drinking and he went headlong or head on into this man. And this man's whole family, his kids, his pregnant wife, and his wife were instantly killed. He says, as I was sitting in that car, and I realized, because none of my family was breathing, they were all dead. As I was sitting there, I heard the Lord say 3 words, let it go. He says, and I knew instantly who was ever in that other car, I had to forgive. And he went over to the other car to see how the man was, and he helped him out. The man was brought up on, a young man, he was 25 years old, was brought up on manslaughter charges. And then he went to bat with the courts. Because the young man, believe it or not, was raised in a Christian home. Supposedly a Christian kid. He went to bat for the young man. The young man somehow ends up committing his life fully to the Lord. And there's forgiveness now between the two. And they tell the story. They were telling the story. He canceled the debt. That's what forgiveness is. It says, you hurt me, but I canceled the debt. Unforgiveness says, you hurt me and you owe me. Most of us say, or many times, I should say most of us will for a period of time say, and I'm not canceling that debt. You owe me. But God forgives us. He does exactly that. He drops the charges against us due to our sin. Jesus includes the prayer of forgiveness in this prayer. Why? For a couple of reasons, but one of the reasons is it's a daily prayer. It's something we should pray daily. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who have sinned against us. Why? Because it's a daily event. It's going to happen daily. When someone does something to offend you, and you're going to need to forgive them. My son, Tim, is painting his room really bright green. Really bright green. Where do you see it? That's really well. Now, I had a couple of paint trays that I had for probably 10 years. When I get done painting, I scrub them out. They're nice. They look like they weren't used. My son Jonathan painted his room, and both paint trays gone. Gone. They were garbage when you were done. Okay? So Timmy wants to paint his room. I go out and buy a brand new paint tray. I look at it after the first time, and I said, Timmy, did it occur to you that maybe when you're done with the paint tray, we need to kind of scrub it out and make it clean? Well, aren't you just going to throw it away? No, I'm going to keep it. But that wasn't the biggie. The biggie was last night. I go downstairs and I have a slop sink. I keep it clean. Okay? I know it's a slop sink. I keep the walls in my washroom free. I wash my hands down there. When I work on a car, last week I had to change the air conditioner in the car. I was covered in grease. I washed my hands clean. I scrubbed out my nails. There was stuff all over the wall, over the sink. I cleaned the wall. I cleaned the sink. Everything is immaculate when I'm done. I want it clean. Yes, I know I'm a little crazy about it. Yes. I go again last night. In my brand new sink that I put in about a year and a half ago, my white sink is green. And he let the paint dry. And I'm looking at this sink. It was a daily event. And if my son wasn't at work, we may have had to choke him for a moment. But instead I spent the next 20 minutes of my life scrubbing the green with a scrubby pad out of my slop sink. And off of my faucet. And off of my walls. I want to kill him. It's a daily event. They're going to mess you up. People around there, you are going to mess you up. And if you go around keeping those things inside and giving everybody these you owe me's and I owe you's, I'll tell you what's going to happen. You are going to lose it. You are going to be covered, you are going to be burdened down, because there is an immutable law in the kingdom. One immutable, there's many, but there's an immutable law in the kingdom. That those who receive forgiveness must give forgiveness out. Peter, he must have really thought he was trumping things up a little bit. Because he comes to Jesus and says, Jesus, how many times must I forgive my brother? 7 times? Well, he thought he was being really good at this. And the reason he thought that was because the Pharisees, my tongue is not working real well this morning. We have a couple of blank pages here. Because the Pharisees declared that if someone forgave you, or sinned against you 3 times, and you forgave him 3 times, you were clear. On the 4th time, you didn't have to. The 4th time, pass out the IOU. Right? So Peter's, he's more than double in a year. I'm going big time. Lord, 7 times? And the Lord says, 7 times? Are you kidding me? Peter, if I had forgiven you forgave you 7 times a day, you're gone. You're history. How many people could say we would be history? 7 times a day. He says, how about 49 times? And Jesus is not saying, or he says, or 490 times. He says, how about 70 times 7? 490 times. Peter's like, 490 times? You see, there's this immutable law that says we must remain in an attitude of forgiveness. Why? Because God is not keeping a list for you and I. He wiped out the list when we got saved. There's no more list being made on us. Yeah, before we're saved, the list is long. You know, I don't know if I said this last week or I was talking to somebody. When we were Catholics and we used to go to confession, I remember we were at the confession with, I was with a bunch of my friends and, you know, did I tell you the story? I told Pep. I said, and this one friend of mine, this girl Peggy, comes out of confession. We were all going to this thing because we were going to receive our confirmation or something together. And I said, "You confess anything?" She says, "Yeah." I said, "You white?" She goes, "I think I'm still stained." I said, "Yeah, I got a feeling it's at least yellow. I think it ain't white." But because that's the way you felt, you weren't getting forgiveness. But we sin. And we have to remain in that attitude of forgiveness. David writes, "If I had cherished sin in my heart, the Lord would not have listened, but God has surely listened and heard my voice in prayer. Praise be to God who has not rejected my prayer or withheld his love from me." Let's cherish it. He uses the word cherished. You know why? Because that's what people do. They cherish those IOUs. Like debt collectors. If you see that person that sinned against you, you send them the bill. Do you understand that? When they come up, when you see them, you give them a cold shoulder. You're sending them the bill. When they try to talk to you ignore them. You're sending them the IOU. They speak evil of you when your name comes up. You speak evil of them when their name comes up. They try to repay, and you try to repay them some type of evil for evil. Maybe lying for something about them. You know what you do? You're giving them the IOU. That's the payback. You owe me. See, there's a million ways. But the bottom line is, we send people the bill. We tell them. See, when my wife was mad at me, she was sending me the bill. I don't know if she cooked dinner those days, but not the bill. You see? Those IOUs. That's the way of the world. We know it happens outside the doors of the church and outside the kingdom. But in the kingdom, in the church, this must not be the case. Inside the church, inside this church, there is to be an atmosphere of love, healing, mercy, grace. And the one thing that will destroy it and keep the Holy Spirit from moving is unforgiveness. So we cannot have an attitude of unforgiveness among us. Settle it quickly. Several years ago, the Peanuts comic strip had Lucy and Charlie Brown practicing football. Lucy would hold the ball for Charlie's place kicking, and then Charlie would kick the ball. But every time Lucy had ever held the ball for Charlie, he would approach the ball and kick with all his might. At the precise moment of the point of no return, Lucy would pick up the ball and Charlie would kick, and his momentum, unchecked by the ball, which was not there to kick, would cause him to fall on his back. We all know that was the character of Lucy. The strip opened with Lucy holding the ball, but Charlie Brown wouldn't kick the ball. Lucy begged him to kick the ball, but Charlie Brown said, "Every time I try and kick the ball, you remove it and I fall on my back." They went back and forth for the longest time, and finally Lucy broke down in tears and admitted, "Charlie Brown, I have been so terrible to you over the years, picking up the football like I have. I have played so many cruel tricks on you, but I have seen the error of my ways. I've seen the hurt look in your eyes when I deceived you. I've been wrong, so wrong. Won't you give a poor penitent girl another chance? Charlie Brown. Charlie Brown was moved by her display of grief and responded to her, "Of course, I'll give you another chance." He stepped back as she held the ball and he ran. At the last moment, Lucy picked up the ball and Charlie Brown fell on his back. Lucy's last words were, "Recognizing your faults and actually changing your ways are two different things, Charlie Brown." God doesn't want us to just recognize we need to forgive and be forgiven. He wants us to change our attitude and act differently towards those who sin against us. We need to empty the sack on our back. We must be the giver and not the taker. I want to read to you a portion of an article that was printed in Christianity Today entitled "Redemption and Restoration in Real Life." Could you come to the camera? It was an article that was transpired 9 months after a Christmas time tragedy in New Life Christian Church in Colorado Springs. This is the story. The event was the shooting of several people in the church parking lot in the building that left 3 dead and 3 wounded. The young man who had done the shooting killed himself after being shot by a security guard. Earlier that day, he had entered Youth with the Mission headquarters in suburban Denver, shooting 4 and killing 2. His name was Matthew Murray, and he had been raised in a Christian home. The tragedy shook the church that had just started coming out of the painful and very public story about their former pastor's, Ted Haggard's sexual sin. I don't know if you remember the story of Ted Haggard. Now they were faced with this terrible tragedy. In the Christianity Today article, it was told that after granting the interview to talk about that day and its after effects, it was revealed that Brady Boyd, the current senior minister, called Murray's parents and asked if they would like to come to New Life Church and see where their son had passed away. They said they wanted to, but refrained from doing so because of their concerns for the church. They were also asked if they would be willing to meet with the parents of the family who had lost 2 teenage daughters that morning. They said yes. The same invitation was extended to victims' families, the worst. They said yes. After showing Murray's around the church where the tragic events took place, they met with the worst in Pastor Boyd's office, the family of the killer and the family of those who were victims. Pastor Boyd is quoted as saying, "What happened there in those 2 hours in my office was the most significant ministry moment I've experienced in all my life." When they first entered the room, the 2 families embraced. They sat, wept, and cried together. Boyd said, "For I don't know how long." Then they prayed together. Later, Jeannie Assam, the security guard who shot Murray, was invited to join them. When Jeannie, who had undoubtedly saved many lives but had been forced to shoot the Murray's son, walked into the room, the Murrays embraced her and hugged her and released her from any guilt and remorse. The dad looked at Jeannie and said, "Please know we are so sorry that you had to do what you did. We're so sorry." The article concludes with these words from Pastor Boyd. We can talk philosophically about repentance and redemption and going forward with God. But what I saw in that room in my office was the greatest testimony of forgiveness and redemption that I have ever seen. It was a testimony that God really can restore and redeem. Forgiveness restores. Forgiveness redeems, even under the most difficult of circumstances. And there is probably nothing in this world that is more liberating. One of the greatest gifts. Beloved, this is not a command He has given to us. This is a gift. To be able to forgive and set free because they are not set free nearly as much as you are set free. Bow your heads. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Praise you, Jesus. Praise you, Jesus. Hallelujah. Praise you, Jesus. Maybe you're here today. Maybe you would say that, Pastor, there are those I need to forgive. There are those I need to forgive. There are those for whom I have to ask for forgiveness. I need to be healed. Sometimes the wounds are so deep. They've come at the hands of a father who was abusive or was not there. At the hands of a mother who was harsh. Sometimes you've delivered the blows. And you want to say, forgive me. Sometimes you have to go to those people you've hurt and ask forgiveness. It doesn't have to always happen like that, but sometimes it happens. Sometimes it just means cleansing your heart and saying, Lord, I need you to forgive me. I've had to do it many times. Jesus says we need to do it daily. I want to ask, are you carrying around IOUs? Are you carrying around IOUs this morning? How full is that sack on your back? Can I have everyone stand to your feet? I believe God wants to do miracles in this place this morning. You may not have thought it like that before we walked in the door. But I believe right now God wants to do miracles. He needs to release people. People need